Thank you for joining this afternoon. If you could just please state your name and title for the record as you begin. Who would like to begin? Please.
Thank you, Chairman Hill and Chairman Salas and members. I'm Valerie Fenstermaker. I'm the Executive Director of the California Veterinary Medical Association. The CVMA represents over 7,000 veterinary medical professionals in the state, including veterinarians, registered veterinary technicians, and students from the 2 veterinary schools at UC Davis and Western University. I am pleased to be before you this afternoon to indicate the CVMA's support of the continuation of the California Veterinary Medical Board. We would like to compliment Executive Director Anne Marie Del Munayo. She inherited some difficult challenges when she took over the VMB, and she is to be commended for her leadership. I have attended nearly every VMB meeting since I took over as Executive Director 12 years ago. I can tell you that the current board and its multidisciplinary committee are a very hard-working group of individuals that continue to place the consumer first when deliberating issues. In addressing the committee's background paper, the CVMA would like to thank the committee for working with us on some of the issues that are important to the veterinary profession. One of the biggest challenges facing the veterinary profession right now is the issue of veterinary drug compounding, which you just heard about. Veterinarians have been compounding medications for as long as there's been a veterinary profession. The authority to compound is critical when treating a wide range of species and sizes of animal patients. Compounding might take the form of adding life-saving medications to IV fluids or diluting a drug in order to make it the proper strength for a sick patient. We are pleased the Board of Pharmacy and the Veterinary Medical Board have been working on a solution for veterinary compounding, and that preliminary language was drafted and approved by the VMB in January. While we agree with the direction of the language, we feel there are some changes needing, as you heard as an example on the labeling. We appreciate that Ms. Mason and Mr. Gage have offered to help the Veterinary Medical Board, the Board of Pharmacy, and the CVMA work on these issues. We want to get it right the first time around. This is a critical issue for our members, and it's probably our biggest issue to resolve this year. Regarding university licensure, the CVMA supports the concept of university licensure, but we would like to see a sunset attached to this provision. Under this proposal, these licensees would not have to take the national exam or complete continuing education courses for license renewal. And because the universities may also establish satellite specialty clinics, we believe it's important to just revisit this process in a few years to make sure that there's adequate consumer protection. But we do believe in the university licensure concept that's been put before you. On the matter of animal rehabilitation, we've been working on this issue for at least 8 years. It's been a complex matter that has involved countless hours at both the multidisciplinary committee level and at the Veterinary Medical Board level. The CVMA believes that the practice of animal rehabilitation is the practice of veterinary medicine, and it requires a veterinarian-client-patient relationship. We also support giving the veterinarian the flexibility to determine if the person providing the treatment is under direct or indirect supervision. We look forward to the establishment of a stakeholder task force that is recommended in the background paper to resolve this matter and to properly protect the consumer. And last but not least, the CVMA would like to thank Chairman Hill for his strong and visionary leadership in the passage of SB 27, the landmark legislation pertaining to the use of antibiotics in livestock. I think that took something out of all of us last year, but we're all very, very proud of it. And we strongly supported SB 27, as well as SB 361, which you just heard requires mandatory continuing education for veterinarians on the judicious use of antibiotics in all animals. I thought 361 was going to be the easy part until we ran into this little snag lately. And it sounds like with the governor's office and Senator Hill's office and the Veterinary Medical Board, we're going to sort all of that out. So thank you again, Mr. Chair, for your hard work on that issue, and thank you, Chairman Salas and all committee members for allowing me to make some comments on the record. My colleague from the CVMA, Dr. Dan Segna, would also like to make a few brief remarks.
Thank you. Please.
Good afternoon, Chairman Hill, Chairman Salas, and members. You heard I'm Dr. Dan Segna. I'm the Assistant Executive Director for the California Veterinary Medical Association. I'm also a veterinarian. I'd like to comment briefly on two of the issues that have come before this group today. The first is item number 2 in the VMB background paper on RVT issues, specifically on whether or not the RVT committee should be reestablished. The CVMA acknowledges and supports the Veterinary Medical Board's commitment to addressing RVT issues that were outlined to you previously by Mr. Johnson. I'm not sure I mentioned this, but we represent nearly 1,000 RVT and RVT student members at all of the Veterinary Medical Board and MDC meetings. Since the RVTC was discontinued, 2 significant changes were implemented which increased the representation and the voice of California RVTs. An RVT was given a voting position on the VMB, and the new multidisciplinary committee was established, as you heard, and now includes 3 RVT members. These changes have given RVTs a more active voice and, more importantly, a voting role in RVT-specific issues and on broader issues that come before the Veterinary Medical Board and affect the entire profession, something that was not possible or available to them previously. RVT concerns have been and continue to be addressed. Over the last 2 years, RVT-specific issues were on the agenda 12 times at the MDC and VMB meetings. We, along with others, present at the meetings, have been given ample opportunity to participate in discussions on all issues such as shelter medicine protocols, minimum standards, premises regulations, controlled substances permits, animal rehabilitation, the alternate route school approval process for RVTs, which makes it easier for candidates to complete their required education, the RVT student exemption, which allows qualified RVT students to gain valuable hands-on experience in a private practice setting. Regulations for these last 2 issues have been approved by the board and are moving through the regulatory process. Several years ago, the legislature determined it was time to consolidate input from veterinarians, RVTs, and the public into the multidisciplinary committee, which has resulted in a more productive, less divisive, and fractured discussions. The CVMA still agrees with this approach and supports the current structure. We, however, would not support the reconstitution of the RVT committee. I also want to touch briefly on the issue raised in the background paper pertaining to veterinarians and RVTs at rodeos. While we are in full support of the welfare of rodeo animals, we believe that current laws should be followed concerning their medical treatment. Regarding an RVT acting independently at a rodeo, the Veterinary Medicine Practice Act stipulates that an RVT cannot diagnose or prescribe and may only treat an animal under the direction of a veterinarian who has established a veterinarian client-patient relationship. Since an on-call veterinarian would not have established this relationship with an owner of an injured animal, it would be a violation of our Practice Act for the veterinarian to give direction to an RVT over the phone. It would also be a violation for an RVT acting on his or her own volition to render care beyond basic first aid or in a life-threatening situation. Another concern that we have involves controlled substances. Euthanasia solutions and many pain medications are scheduled drugs and fall under DEA laws. Under these laws, RVTs do not have the authority to transport these restricted drugs to a rodeo arena. For these reasons, the CVMA would not support the independent use of RVTs at rodeos. We would, however, like to offer a possible alternative solution to this issue, and that would be requiring the rodeo management to submit the name of the on-call veterinarian to the Veterinary Medical Board. In this way, they would know who was there and that the laws were in fact being followed. As we have in the past, we will continue to educate our members regarding their legal responsibility to report rodeo injuries. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Hi there. I'd like to begin by thanking the senators and assembly members of this committee for the opportunity for me to speak today about my concerns as they relate to the California Veterinary Medical Board. I'm here to speak about an item in your background material, and which was actually not on the agenda, the creation of the Animal Rehabilitation Task Force. My name is Karen Atlas, and I am a licensed physical therapist in this state for nearly 20 years. About 8 years ago, I transitioned from being solely committed to human physical therapy to practicing my craft on animals, specifically on canines. As a founding member and now the current president of the California Association of Animal Physical Therapists, I have been actively following the California Veterinary Medical Board's progression of the regulatory language of animal rehab and have made many attempts to collaborate with this board to provide meaningful input based on my expertise in this field and my intense research efforts into other successful state practice acts. Despite my attempts in both written emails and verbal testimony, my input was not considered during the crafting of the regulatory language that was created last year. Furthermore, my comments continued to be ignored earlier this year at the Multidisciplinary Advisory Committee meeting when the chair failed to bring my points in front of the VMB for consideration and instead brought forth inaccurate information as it related to other states' practice acts. As a board whose mission it is to protect consumers and animals through the development and maintenance of professional standards, I remain deeply concerned about the current VMB's staffing and membership. The pervasive failure to recognize where conflict of interest exists and where market interests appear to be preventing an unbiased, objective review of best approaches to the regulation of this growing field has been a deep concern of mine. The overlap in membership between the California Veterinary Medical Association, the VMB, and the MDAC, most notably recognized with the past California Veterinary Medical Association's Animal Rehabilitation Task Force, who is now the chair of the MDAC, means that there may be difficulties in separating the agenda of the CVMA from the VMB's independent review on behalf of consumer interests. The possibility that the VMB is the victim of agency capture very well may exist. Indeed, the CVMA drafted the initial animal rehab regulations. The CVMA Animal Rehabilitation Task Force, which is now chaired by Dr. John Klingborg, who was chaired at that time by Dr. John Klingborg, who is now the current chair of the MDAC, reported its findings and recommendations to the MDAC in February 2011, and the MDAC recommended the verbatim CVMA drafted regulatory language to the board in January of 2013. The regulatory language only developed into more restrictive language from there when the final iteration was approved by the VMB last year. Fortunately, after nearly universal opposition by the public and the legal issues which came about as a result of the U.S. Supreme Court case of the North Carolina Dental Examiners versus the Federal Trade Commission with respect to restraint of trade of qualified professionals, the VMB did withdraw their pursuit of the language they had been developing for nearly a 5-year period, or as Ms. Fenstermaker pointed out, possibly up to 8 years at this point. I am pleased, however, to recognize that an animal rehabilitation task force will be created to include qualified stakeholders and have legislative oversight to monitor the meetings to ensure transparency and accountability. I would like to commend the direction that is now being taken and would respectfully request my involvement as an active participant on this task force. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I also want to start by thanking the senators and assembly members of this committee for allowing me to speak today. I will also be speaking regarding the issue of animal rehabilitation. My name is Kelly Boyston. I am a California licensed physical therapist and a certified equine rehabilitation therapist. I am also a registered veterinary technician. I have a history of 12 years in the veterinary field, 20 in the human rehabilitation world, and 7 in the combined worlds. The curriculum to obtain a degree in physical therapy is heavily based on musculoskeletal anatomy and physiology and includes extensive education on critical thinking, assessing pain in verbal and nonverbal patients, manual palpation and assessment of joint mobility and muscle length tension in verbal and nonverbal patients, the correct use of modalities like electrical stimulation and ultrasound, and formulating a treatment plan based on the outcomes of these assessments. The curriculum for a registered veterinary technician contains none of this. The transition from human musculoskeletal anatomy to animal is much less difficult than one might think. Once you learn joint kinematics, joint biomechanics, accessory joint motion, and length tension relationship in muscles, and the proper exercise prescription specific to an injury in a human, the transition to equine or canine is quite easy. I am a founding member of the California Association of Animal Physical Therapists, the CAAPT. I have attended many vet board meetings, often traveling up to Sacramento from Southern California where I live, with the hope of participating in development of language and regulation regarding animal rehabilitation. Despite the persistence of myself and the CAAPT in attending many meetings every year and our transparent desire to provide assistance and guidance regarding animal rehab, the VMB has never incorporated any of what we say into their decisions, despite us being the acknowledged experts in the field of rehabilitation. And whether it is accurate or not, the perception is that the CVMA has had a very strong influence over the decisions of the VMB regarding the issue of animal rehabilitation, which is a clear conflict of interest. When the VMB proposed language that in essence claimed to say that any service provided to an animal, even including education and wellness massage, was veterinary medicine and thus would require direct veterinary supervision, there was a huge public outcry. They held a public hearing on this very controversial topic on September 9th of last year. I attended that public hearing along with a lot of other concerned individuals. It is very sad and extremely telling of the VMB's short-sighted attitude on this controversial issue that they themselves were not in attendance. While legally they may not be required to attend to myself and every other person in that room, it spoke to the fact that the VMB was not interested in what the animal owners, who are the consumers they are supposed to protect, had to say. There was no government oversight in the form of video recording of this hearing, which would have provided transparency and accountability by the VMB. And the review summary of the public hearing that was posted by the VMB in no way was an accurate reflection of the comments and sentiment from the public at the meeting. I know this because I was at the meeting, and they were not. I am pleased that an animal rehab task force is now being created that will be multidisciplinary and will include the stakeholders in this issue and not be limited to veterinarians and RVTs, as has previously been the case. I feel that this will best protect the rights of animals and the owners who love and care for them. I feel I would be exceptionally qualified to be on this task force, as I hold a very unique set of qualifications in that I am a physical therapist, a certified equine rehabilitation therapist, and a registered veterinary technician. I want to sincerely thank you for your time and consideration in this matter and allowing me to speak before you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Mr. London.
Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Carl London. I'm here on behalf of the California Physical Therapy Association. Would like to iterate our position that we are very supportive of the task force recommendation that is in the background report. We are curious to know whether or not you're going to make that a legislative task force, in other words, in statute, or is it going to be one that you just ask the board to do? As you can tell, there's a growing demand for animal rehabilitation and therapy with animals. Consumers are out there now looking for the best possible outcomes for their animals, and it turns out that physical therapists are quite good at doing this when they have a specific competence and expertise in this area. Your background paper also correctly notes that other states have dealt with this. Very clear that we have to do something on this to resolve the issue one way or the other. So we want to thank you for the recommendation that your staff has made to look into a task force to sort this out. And there are all kinds of issues. I mean, issues of where this is going to be done, how that, whether that triggers a requirement for a premises license, what level of supervision. I'm actually pleased to hear the CVMA talk about the veterinarian being able to make that determination in terms of whether they need direct or indirect. We had heard in the past possibilities that they would always require direct. That didn't seem to make a lot of sense. You don't necessarily need to have somebody in a lawn chair watching the activity going on. So that seems reasonable, but this route of having a task force to vet this out and talk this through over the next year is a wise recommendation, and we would support that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having us. My name is Elaine Moon. I'm the president of the California Registered Veterinary Technician Association. We are the only statewide association that is run for RVTs by RVTs. I'm also a member of the CVMA, and I can tell you, as a CVMA member, I'm not allowed to vote or attend any of their board meetings except by special invitation. So that's disconcerting to me that they think that they can really truly represent the California RVT when we do not have a vote in their say. In 2003, the Joint Legislative Sunset Review Committee recommended that the Registered Veterinary Technician Committee be given more authority over issues within its jurisdiction to answer the concern that RVTs were excluded from independent authority over their own profession. As a compromise, we agreed to allow the RVT committee to be sunsetted while adding an additional member to the Veterinary Medical Board and the first RVT member to the the first RVT member to the Veterinary Medical Board and an additional member to the Multidisciplinary Committee. Unfortunately, since the RVT Committee held its final meeting in June of 2011, the MDC has not fulfilled the function of replacing the RVT Committee. Its composition of 9 members, 3 of whom are RVTs, virtually guarantees that RVT issues are not given the highest priority as was mandated. In fact, the record shows that only after the last sunset review did an RVT issue make it to the agenda of the Multidisciplinary Committee. Since 2014, the MDC has only minimally addressed the mission that the legislature has previously assigned to the RVTC. That mandate was to specifically advise and assist the board with examinations, investigate and evaluate applications, provide for the inspection and approval of RVT schools, advise and assist in developing regulations for job tasks for RVTs and assistants, advise and assist the board in developing regulations to define 4840C regarding DEA licenses. We believe that these specific RVT mandates have been lost. And it's now apparent that instead of RVTs having more authority over our own issues, we actually have less authority than we had prior to the RVTC being eliminated, and that important RVT issues continue to be seriously neglected. Schools are not being approved or inspected. Exam fees have not been justified. Exam and application issues are really not on anybody's agenda. And I'd like to point out that this is the first time that you've heard CARVTA, or the California Registered Veterinary Technician Association, brought before this panel today. We have tried very hard to work with the VMB. We have tried very hard to work with the CVMA, and we feel quite often that we are shut out. Recently, there was a committee to discuss shelter regulations for RVTs. We were not invited to that. We weren't even advised of that. As shelter medicine RVT myself, we could have provided quite a bit of insight into the proposed rules and regulations. And I'm going to pass the microphone to Carol Schumacher.
Hi, thank you. I'm Carol Schumacher. I'm an RVT. I'm also a practice owner of a practice, about 9 veterinarians, 12 to 14 RVTs, total of staff of 50 in Menlo Park, California. We also have an animal rehab facility and have been doing animal rehab with physical therapists, veterinarians, and RVTs for almost 10 years. And I would agree with the comments made by the 2 physical therapists here. I would agree entirely with their statements. But I would like to address the staff report, which I want to thank the staff for very much. I think it did an excellent job of describing the problems that RVTs are having. I appreciate the recommendation of the reconstituting of the RVT committee. I think only with either with the RVT committee or if we had our own board, only with having an entity that is only focused on RVT issues will our issues be addressed appropriately. For example, the Veterinary Medical Board indicated as their one thing that they've accomplished since the RVT committee was dissolved in 2011. They said that there was a regulation that finally made it forward, 2064, which required that all schools, all RVT schools, or was the regulation that followed up with legislation that requires that RVT schools be inspected and approved. And finally, in 2015, they passed the regulations that came out of the RVT committee in 2011. But in the January 20th of 2016 meeting, the board made it very clear that they have no intention of enforcing those regulations. They say that they feel that AVMA approval of schools is sufficient and that they don't need to approve schools. When it was very clear in 2009, the whole reason that those regulations came out of the RVT committee in 2011 was because in 2009, the Veterinary Medical Board's legal counsel made it clear that RVT schools in California must be approved by the Veterinary Medical Board. And that included AVMA, American Veterinary Medical Association, accredited schools. The AVMA is a private body, and they have no duty to report or answer to the government. However, the primary issue that the legal counsel had was that the students attending those schools that were not approved by California do not qualify for the state exam, and therefore even in-state AVMA-approved schools needed California approval. And the board sat on those regulations for almost 5 years, and only after sunsetting, when it was shown that they were not moving, that not once had they ever addressed a single RVT issue on any of their agendas, did they finally move that regulation forward. But now they're saying they won't enforce it, and they want to, they say publicly, you can look and it's on YouTube, and it's the first half hour of the meeting, you can see them making clear that they have no intention of enforcing that regulation. They want to change it, and since it took 6 years to get the regulation to come through, that means another 6 years, and that means that California RVTs have to be concerned that the schools are not approved. And part of the problem is that these are very expensive private institutions, and the requirements that we had in the regulation were that they inform students on their pass rates, and they inform students on the transferability of credits. So I'll make it short because it's the end of the day. You have language that would, we would like you to make sure that the RVT committee is reinstated so that there will be a body that will make sure that schools are inspected and improved in California. That was part of the duty of the RVTC. We also would appreciate the description of the problem in the staff report with regards to the exam, the law exam that has added considerably to the cost of taking the RVT exam. And Business and Professions Code 4848A outlines a take-home law exam for veterinarians. We think that you can use that language and that it would apply perfectly for RVTs. And we don't think that RVTs should be held at a higher standard and at a much greater cost than veterinarians who supervise them to be responsible for understanding that same information about the laws in California regarding veterinary medicine. Also in that regulation, or in that law in 4048, are provisions that allow that if a candidate went to a California veterinary school, they wouldn't have to take this exam because the coursework would be included. And we'd like that same provision for California RVT schools. So we look forward with regards to the recommendation for animal rehab, that this task force go forward, and we hope that you will reinstate the RVTC and move forward to allow, and we do need a legislative fix on this exam because the Office of Exam Services would never allow a take-home exam otherwise, but the pass rates on the exam are 95%, so that's validation psychometrically that this is an appropriate way to go.